The forgotten rodent control secret isn't a $300 exterminator or $40 boxes of toxic chemical bait that poison your barn cats and owls. It's 1 part cornmeal mixed with 1 part plaster of Paris and a tablespoon of sugar in a dry bowl. The rodent eats the sweet mixture, drinks water, and the plaster hydrates and hardens inside its stomach, causing a fatal mechanical blockage. No chemicals, no toxins, no secondary poisoning. If a cat or owl eats the dead rodent, they are completely safe. This is the Rogue Archivist. The global pest control industry is a $15 billion machine built on recurring chemical dependency. You are paying $300 for an exterminator to set plastic bait stations, or $40 for toxic anticoagulant poisons that kill slowly and contaminate your property's food chain. You just mixed a rodent eliminator for $2 using materials from any hardware store that works through mechanical action, leaves 0 toxic residue, and cannot harm your pets if they consume a dead rodent. $2 versus $300. The math is so absurd that the moment you see it, you'll understand why the chemical companies completely erased this 1800s grain miller method from public knowledge. But just knowing the ratio is only 10% of the secret. Today, I'm going to show you the exact mechanical chemistry that makes plaster hydration superior to toxic anticoagulants. I'm going to show you how 19th century grain millers and farmers eliminated massive rat infestations without contaminating human food supplies or killing their prized barn cats. And I'm going to show you the critical placement strategy and water source positioning that determines whether this method works effectively or fails completely. By the end of this investigation, you will have the blueprint to protect your homestead from rodents without spreading poison and bypass the chemical pest control cartel forever. Let's begin. The science behind this method involves understanding how plaster of Paris reacts with water. Plaster of Paris is gypsum that has been heated to remove most of its water content, creating a fine powder. When this powder is mixed with water, it undergoes a chemical reaction called hydration. The powder absorbs the water and reforms into solid gypsum crystals. This is the same reaction that allows plaster to be used for casting sculptures or repairing walls. When you mix plaster with water, you have a limited working time before it sets into a hard, stone-like material. This hardening process is irreversible. Once the plaster has cured, it becomes a solid mass that cannot be dissolved or broken down by digestive processes. When a rodent consumes the cornmeal and plaster mixture, the plaster powder enters the stomach in dry form. The cornmeal provides bulk and makes the mixture palatable. The sugar acts as an attractant. The rodent, having eaten dry powder, experiences thirst. It seeks water and drinks. The moment water enters the stomach and contacts the plaster powder, hydration begins. The plaster absorbs the water and starts to harden. Within hours, the plaster has formed a solid mass inside the rodent's digestive system. This creates a complete blockage. The rodent cannot digest food. It cannot pass waste. The blockage is fatal. Death occurs relatively quickly, usually within 12 to 24 hours. And critically, because this is a mechanical process and not a chemical poison, there is no toxin in the rodent's tissues. If a barn cat, owl, hawk, or dog consumes the dead rodent, they are completely safe. There is no secondary poisoning. This is the fundamental advantage over modern chemical rodenticides. Modern rat poisons use anticoagulants. These are chemicals that prevent blood from clotting. When a rodent eats anticoagulant poison, it dies from internal bleeding over several days. But the poison remains in the rodent's body. And when a predator or scavenger eats that poisoned rodent, the predator ingests the anticoagulant. If the predator eats multiple poisoned rodents, the toxin accumulates in its system. This is called secondary poisoning. And it kills thousands of cats, dogs, owls, hawks, and other animals every year. The pest control industry knows this, but they continue selling anticoagulant baits because the recurring revenue model is too profitable to abandon. The historical use of this plaster method goes back to the 1800s when grain mills and farming operations faced constant rodent pressure. Rats and mice could devastate stored grain, destroying months of food in weeks. But millers and farmers could not use poisons because the grain was destined for human consumption. Any contamination would render the entire supply useless, and they could not risk killing their barn cats, which were essential for rodent control. So they developed mechanical methods. The most effective was the cornmeal and plaster mixture. Millers had both ingredients readily available. Cornmeal was a byproduct of grain processing. Plaster was used for building maintenance and repairs. Mixing them together created an effective rodent control method that was safe for the surrounding ecosystem. The method was documented in farming almanacs, agricultural extension bulletins, and oral tradition passed from generation to generation. It was common knowledge among rural communities well into the early 20th century. But the method had a fatal flaw from a commercial perspective. You cannot patent cornmeal, you cannot patent plaster, and once you mix a batch, it works indefinitely with no recurring purchases needed. There is no subscription model, no repeat business, no brand loyalty. This made it worthless to the emerging chemical industry. In the 1940s, chemical companies developed the first synthetic anticoagulant rodenticides. Warfarin, the most famous, was initially developed as a blood thinner for medical use, but researchers discovered it was lethal to rodents at higher doses. Chemical companies saw an opportunity. They could package warfarin and similar compounds as rodent baits, market them as modern and scientific, and create a product that required continuous repurchase. A homeowner dealing with rodents would buy bait, place it out, and the rodents would die. But more rodents would arrive, so the homeowner would buy more bait, and more, and more. This created a perpetual revenue stream. The chemical companies didn't want to solve the rodent problem permanently. They wanted to manage it perpetually. At the same time, the pest control service industry professionalized and consolidated. Small local exterminators were absorbed by national chains. These companies standardized on chemical treatments because chemicals created recurring service contracts. A quarterly pest control subscription became standard for both residential and commercial properties. The technician would visit every 3 months, replenish bait stations, spray pesticides, and collect a fee. The customer believed they were preventing infestations. In reality, they were funding a business model built on managed dependency. The marketing message was clear and effective. Modern pest control requires professional expertise and advanced chemistry. Traditional methods are primitive and unreliable. Rodents are dangerous disease vectors that require aggressive chemical intervention. Do not attempt to handle pest problems yourself. Call a professional. This messaging was reinforced through advertising, through partnerships with hardware stores, and through regulatory frameworks that made commercial pesticide application a licensed profession requiring training and certification. The barriers to entry were raised, the knowledge was professionalized, and the traditional methods were forgotten. But the traditional methods were not inferior, they were different. The plaster method does not prevent rodents from entering your property. It eliminates the ones that are already there. It does not create a protective barrier. It provides targeted control, and it does so without introducing toxins into the environment. For a homeowner or farmer who understands the method and applies it correctly, it is as effective as chemical baits and vastly safer for the ecosystem. Here's what happens when the system they built fails. When you call an exterminator and they set bait stations around your property, those stations contain anticoagulant poison. Rodents eat the poison. They die slowly over several days, often retreating to wall voids or inaccessible areas where they decompose and create horrific odors. And if your barn cat or dog finds and eats one of those poisoned rodents, the anticoagulant enters their system. Depending on the dose and the animal's size, this can cause internal bleeding, organ failure, and death. Veterinarians treat hundreds of secondary poisoning cases every year. Pet owners spend thousands of dollars on emergency care, and many animals die despite treatment. But if you had used the cornmeal and plaster method instead, none of this would happen. The rodent dies from mechanical blockage, not chemical poisoning. There is no toxin in its tissues. A cat that eats the dead rodent is completely safe. You have eliminated the pest without contaminating your property or endangering your animals. This is responsible stewardship, and this is exactly what the $15 billion pest control industry cannot allow you to have. But the knowledge was never truly lost. It was buried, and now we're digging it up. The historical record is clear, the chemistry is sound, and the method is so simple that anyone can mix it in minutes. The only reason you didn't know about this until today is because chemical companies spent 80 years replacing mechanical control with toxic chemicals, creating recurring revenue models that require continuous purchases, and erasing traditional pest management knowledge from agricultural education. You are not a homeowner. You are a recurring revenue stream. And every time you buy chemical bait or pay an exterminator, you are feeding the system that engineered your dependence and poisoned your property's ecosystem. Now I'm going to give you the exact blueprint. But first, critical clarifications and ethical considerations. This method is lethal to rodents. It causes death through mechanical blockage. Some people may consider this inhumane. Others will point out that anticoagulant poisons cause death through internal bleeding over several days, which is arguably worse. I am presenting this method as a historical technique that was widely used and that offers a significant safety advantage over chemical poisons in terms of secondary poisoning prevention. Whether you choose to use it is your decision. You should also check local regulations. Some jurisdictions have restrictions on rodent control methods, and you should consider whether lethal control is necessary or whether exclusion and prevention might be better long-term strategies. With those considerations stated, here's the formula. You need 3 ingredients. First, cornmeal. Plain yellow cornmeal from the grocery store, not cornmeal mix with added ingredients. Just pure ground corn, approximately 1 cup. Cost, about 50 cents. Second, Plaster of Paris. This is gypsum powder, available at any hardware store in the drywall or home repair section. Approximately 1 cup. Cost, about $1.50. Third, granulated white sugar, approximately 1 tablespoon. You already have this in your kitchen. Total cost, approximately $2. Here's the mixing process. In a dry bowl, combine 1 cup of cornmeal with 1 cup of Plaster of Paris. Add 1 tablespoon of sugar. Mix thoroughly until completely blended. The mixture should be uniform with no clumps of plaster. This is important. If the plaster clumps, the rodent may avoid those pieces. Keep the mixture completely dry. Do not add water. Do not add liquid of any kind. The mixture must remain in powder form. Placement strategy. Identify areas where rodents are active. Look for droppings, gnaw marks, and travel paths along walls and baseboards. Place small amounts of the dry mixture in shallow dishes or lids in these areas. Use disposable dishes or lids that you will not reuse for food. Place the mixture where rodents will find it but where pets cannot access it. This might be behind appliances, in attics, in crawl spaces, or in storage areas. If you have pets, you must ensure they cannot reach the mixture. While the cornmeal and plaster are not toxic, if a dog or cat consumes the dry powder, you do not want them eating it. Critical water placement. This is the most important part of the method. Place a shallow dish of water 4 to 6 feet away from each mixture placement. The water must be accessible to rodents. The entire method depends on the rodent eating the dry mixture and then drinking water. If water is not available nearby, the rodent will not drink after eating, the plaster will not hydrate, and the method will fail. Do not place water too close to the mixture. Rodents are suspicious of new things. If the water is right next to the food, they may avoid both. Separation encourages natural behavior. They eat, they move, they drink. Expected results. Within 24 to 48 hours, you should see a reduction in rodent activity. Dead rodents may be found near the mixture or water sources. Remove and dispose of dead rodents promptly. Continue monitoring. If activity persists, replenish the mixture and water. The method is most effective for controlling small to moderate infestations. For severe infestations, you may need to combine this method with exclusion strategies, such as sealing entry points and removing food sources. Advantages and limitations. The primary advantage is safety. No secondary poisoning, no environmental contamination, no risk to pets if they consume a dead rodent. The primary limitation is that this is a reactive method. It controls rodents that are present. It does not prevent new rodents from entering. For long-term control, you must address entry points, food sources, and harborage areas. Seal gaps. Remove clutter. Store food in rodent-proof containers. The plaster method is a tool, not a complete solution. But it is a tool that is safer and cheaper than chemical alternatives. This is a $2 investment that eliminates your dependency on $300 exterminators and the $15 billion pest control industry. No toxic chemicals, no secondary poisoning, no recurring service contracts. You have just reclaimed a grain miller's technique that protected food supplies for generations using knowledge that the chemical industry systematically erased. And once you understand that this is possible, you start to realize that many of the other systems you depend on are built on the same model. Manufactured complexity, proprietary chemicals, engineered dependence. The corporations that profit from your ignorance do not want you to know that you can protect your homestead from rodents for $2. They want you buying chemical baits every month, paying quarterly service fees, and remaining dependent on systems that poison your property and endanger your pets. But you are not powerless. Every time you use this mechanical method instead of chemical poison, you are making a decision to protect your property's ecosystem. You are refusing to participate in secondary poisoning. You are choosing a method that is safer for your barn cats, your owls, your dogs, and your land. And you are using knowledge that grain millers had in the 1800s and that modern pest control companies deliberately erased. Protecting your family's food and homestead shouldn't mean blanketing your property in toxic chemicals that endanger your pets and grandchildren. By reclaiming this miller's trick, you bypass the chemical cartels, save hundreds of dollars, and act as the true responsible protector of your land. The modern world has convinced you that you are helpless without professional exterminators and chemical poisons, that you cannot control pests without toxic substances, that protecting your property requires introducing hazardous materials that threaten your pets and wildlife, but the historical record proves otherwise. 19th century grain millers protected massive food stores from rat infestations using cornmeal and plaster. They did it without contaminating human food. They did it without killing their barn cats. They used knowledge that was documented in farming almanacs before the chemical industry developed synthetic rodenticides and erased mechanical control methods from agricultural education. That knowledge was systematically hidden from you, and now you have it back. Use it. Protect your homestead. Safeguard your ecosystem. And remember that every system trying to make you dependent is terrified of the moment you realize you don't need them. This is the Rogue Archivist. The vault is open. The knowledge is yours. Take your independence back.